this Canadian self-appointed leader of the Slammers and the official voice for all who follow Tolle, paused for a moment to enjoy the sudden hush among the crowd of fanatic followers, and then moved closer to the great ball of string, which served dual functions, both as an odd metaphor and an even odder microphone, and uttered the now infamously convoluted instruction to all true believers, blah, 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 an instruction to the faithful, which has been translated successfully in recent times only by the exhaustive scholarly work of thousands and thousands of linguists and grammarians, nearly half of whom generally agree that the core message issued that day by the Grand Eye of Tolle actually was a secret missive to all the slammers in the crowd, exhorting them to grab your balls and hit the lanes, cause it's too for Tuesday and every third game is free. A curious reference to the small but growing intergalactic pastime of the slammers, which, to be specific, refers to the slammers' complete and total fascination with that particularly noble game and sport which on the planet Earth is called bowling, and is well known to evoke comparable, if not greatly increased, levels of enthusiasm among its more impassioned devotees on Earth who, quite naturally, form bowling leagues, wear intricately designed shirts that often feature custom embroidery showcasing their club names and favorite monikers, don multicolored shoes which are made from the dried and processed hides of assorted animals and are designed by specially trained physicists and engineers to provide equal amounts of sliding and stopping power, and who, more than anything else, desire to get as many strikes as possible, especially in the 10th frame. The recent strikes of another type, made by the Slammers in their assault on the planet Ranivir, have been more successful than the Grand Eye of Tolle had dreamed possible. And while the victory was something for all Slammers to relish, the simple fact of the matter was that none of the Slammers was able to relish much of anything, since one only became a Slammer by succumbing completely to the elaborate and ever-present brainwashing that transformed otherwise good and sensible people into Slammers, something the Grand Eye of Tolle knew far too well, since he was the one who devised the various brainwashing procedures and techniques that made it possible to control and to manipulate his fanatic followers, the Slammers. In the days and hours before the assault on Ranivir began, the Grand Eye of Tolle had devoted most of his waking time to observing and refining the preparations being made for the assault. And even though the assault on Ranivir had all the appearances of being routine, the Grand Eye of Tolle was very adamant in his concern that nothing should go wrong. In part, of course, this was a consequence of the greatly increased paranoia which affected the Grand Eye of Tolle as more nations, planets, solar systems, and galaxies became aware of the Slammer menace. But at the deepest levels, the Grand Eye of Tolle was so completely insecure and insane in every respect that no matter how big the great ball of string became, it would never be big enough to fill the vast emptiness in his psyche, the void which at first unwillingly, but later with consciously inviting willingness, soon became filled with hate for everything good, a hate so deeply overwhelming that it consumed the mind of the Grand Eye of Tolle and warped it so completely that the Grand Eye of Tolle became different, transformed both internally and externally in ways that range from the subtle, such as his need to do everything 3 times, no more, no less, to the obvious, such as the curved horn that started growing from the middle of his forehead, and the fuzzy tail that soon appeared and caused him to begin wearing elaborate robes in an effort to hide it, since it tended to make him look a bit like a monkey. The assault plan was as simple as it was brilliant, and it followed a time-tested schedule. First, thousands and thousands of Slammers dressed in clown costumes and flying tiny airplanes which resemble bumper cars flew in formations across the sky, releasing colorful smoke trails that curiously stayed in place and were not affected by the prevailing winds in the atmosphere. These colorful smoke trails actually were special vapor pipes, which soon were woven into a grid that interlaced throughout the sky to form a net which covered the city or region that was being attacked. And since the Slammers usually began their assaults in more rural areas, where people typically had no knowledge or advance warning of the Slammers, what usually happened was that people would stand outside and watch the sky, presuming, quite unfortunately and incorrectly, that it was a holiday show of some sort, even though this was no holiday show, and its purpose was dangerously simple. Once the net was in place and became energized, it began radiating special brainwashing waves, which quickly took control of the minds of all those people who did not have sufficient foresight or sense to recognize what was happening and, consequently, failed immediately to cover their heads with aluminum foil, since the only effective way to block these special brainwashing waves was to use aluminum foil as a protective shield. Within a matter of minutes, these unfortunate local inhabitants were transformed into a new army of slammers. Then were given instructions regarding their roles in the assault and soon began heading in groups toward the more populated areas of the planet where the final assaults occurred. So long as everything went precisely according to schedule, an entire planet could be conquered in less than a standard galactic week, which, according to generally accepted rules, was 8 days, something that greatly annoyed the Grand Eye of Tole, since it was not evenly divisible by 3. This being, among other things, one of the primary motivations that drove the Grand Eye of Tole to need to control as many nations, planets, solar systems, and galaxies as possible, which, of course, was the only way he could gain sufficient popular votes to cause precisely 1 day to be added to the generally accepted standard galactic week, thereby making it 9 days, which, of course, was evenly divisible by 3. Over the course of history, there have been many wars fought for a variety of good, bad, and remarkably silly reasons. But since this particular war was being fought over the definition of the generally accepted standard galactic week, then the final analysis placed it in a position somewhere between bad and silly. Overall, especially considering that very few of the inhabited planets of the universe even knew about the generally accepted standard galactic week, let alone gave it any thought or credibility in practice. On some planets, there were only days but no weeks, while on other planets there were neither days nor weeks, but plenty of very long hours. And more than a few well-advanced planets literally had no time for time at all, since having decided by mutual agreement among their various inhabitants that the concepts of past, present, and future were such a waste of time that it was better to avoid them entirely. A very sensible strategy which had the additional benefit of greatly simplifying the conjugation of verbs. When the first wave of the assault on Ranivir began, Professor Dave Darkstone, noted astrophysicist and gravity generator expert, was on Ranivir visiting his family and relatives for the holidays. And within seconds of looking outside the window of the small cabin next to the pond to see what was causing all the sudden commotion and excitement, Darkstone immediately began putting together the pieces of the new puzzle that had appeared in the early morning sky. Having a pair of binoculars handy, since he was an avid bird watcher, Darkstone focused his gaze through the window onto the little airplanes that were flying in formation across the sky, and found it more than a tiny bit strange that the little airplanes were being flown by clowns, which was only slightly less strange than the fact that the little airplanes looked like the bumper cars one might find at a carnival or an amusement park. The smoke trails left behind by the little airplanes were very colorful, which increased the surreal aspects of the aerial display. But what most disturbed Darkstone was observing the smoke trails staying in place rather than being scattered by the prevailing winds that he knew were present in the lower atmosphere at this time of year on Ranivir. Giving the matter a few more moments of additional thought, Darkstone quite sensibly decided that the winged armada of clowns flying little airplanes, which resembled bumper cars and emitted colorful smoke trails, was entirely too strange to be explained by anything that made the least bit of sense in terms of being any type of holiday extravaganza he had ever seen. Consequently, Darkstone had the sudden realization that something might not be entirely right about what he was seeing in the sky so early in the morning. And although he had never actually used aluminum foil as a protective mind shield, he had read about it in various science fiction books and soon recalled listening very recently to a broadcast that had explained how aluminum foil could be used as a mind shield to provide protection against certain types of brainwashing waves. Hence, it was in this way that Darkstone put together the pieces of the strange puzzle and decided to cover his head with aluminum foil, an action which proved to be remarkably brilliant not only in retrospect, but also in many other respects. Unfortunately, since he was alone in the small cabin at the time, due primarily to the fact that all his family and relatives immediately had run outside to watch what they naively thought was a holiday extravaganza in the sky, by the time Darkstone had completely covered his head in aluminum foil and had created some convenient openings so that he could see, hear, and breathe, it was too late to help anyone else. Nearly so quickly as all his family and relatives had run outside and subsequently had become mesmerized by the undulating, brainwashing waves emanating from the now completed net, which was suspended overhead colorfully in the morning sky, they all assembled into a tight group and began marching toward the nearby town while mumbling something almost incoherently about stealing our dreams, our women, our country western music, and local control of our bowling leagues. Something which Darkstone found to be more than a bit puzzling, really, since nobody on Ranivir, including his family, all his relatives, and himself, had ever heard of country western music or bowling. Darkstone certainly could understand the need for dreams and women, both of these being among the most basic needs of men throughout the universe. But what was this country western music, and what was this thing called bowling? More importantly, what was so special about country western music and bowling that put them on equal footing with dreams and women? Since no answers to these questions immediately came into his mind, and considering that this certainly had all the markings of a truly strange morning, Darkstone filled his backpack with food, water, an extra roll of aluminum foil, and his binoculars. Then grabbed his fishing pole and lures, jumped into one of the nearby boats, and rowed to the middle of the pond which adjoined the front yard of the small cabin, and started fishing while simultaneously taking the opportunity to ponder everything that had happened so far on this very unusual holiday morning. After a short time, during which Darkstone had begun to form the foundation of an hypothesis regarding the various ways that aluminum foil might function as a protective mind shield, a clown flying a bumper car zoomed over the pond where Darkstone was enjoying this quiet interlude as he attempted to determine whether it continued to be necessary for him to keep his head covered in aluminum foil. As the flying bumper car made a second pass over the pond, the clown leaned over the side of the cockpit and shouted to Darkstone, blah, 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 or so it sounded to Darkstone at the time. Then the clown looked at Darkstone and gave him a thumbs-up sign, honked his horn, and disappeared over the treetops that surrounded the pond. Suggesting that Darkstone was dumbfounded by this surely would be reasonable, but he was more than dumbfounded, really, and the simple fact of the matter was that his curiosity was more than a tiny bit piqued. Consequently, since these were the holidays and Darkstone was in a festive mood, he decided to row back to the small cabin where he could try to get some sensible information from the radio that he always kept handy just for times like these. The wonderful thing about a fine radio is that having all the bands and channels readily available virtually guarantees that you can always find someone broadcasting something somewhere. And if your radio additionally is configured for broadcasting itself, then you can communicate virtually anytime, anywhere with someone, somewhere about nearly everything. Something which, especially considering all the events that had happened so far on this very unusual holiday morning, appeared to be a very sensible thing for Darkstone to do as quickly as possible. As soon as the boat hit the shore, Darkstone jumped out and pulled the boat onto the dry land. And not even bothering to unload anything, he ran into the small cabin and carefully unpacked his Universatone galactic radio and then set it on a nearby table. The greatest aspect of a Universatone galactic radio was its surprising combination of compactness and complexity, since functionality in a portable radio was equally so important as size and weight. There were other models of course, but none of them had everything, all the bands and all the channels, plus an elaborate array of antennae, as well as the classic Universatone Super Deluxe Broadcaster Master microphone, which was a true marvel of modern science packaged in a handsome spheroid shape, complete with a triple chrome grille and glowing on-the-air indicator light. As Darkstone selected one of the antennae arrays, which was done simply by pressing the appropriate button on the front panel of the Universatone, the dials brightened and began to glow softly. Pressing another button at the top right of the radio caused the Universatone Super Deluxe Broadcaster Master microphone to swivel into position, and the on-air light began glowing in a gently pulsating purple color, which indicated that the Universatone was ready to begin its work. Darkstone carefully studied the dial in the center of the Universatone console, and within a few seconds, each of the selected bands and channels began indicating active signals by tiny glowing dots of various colors, each of which showed the relative strength of its signal as well as its proximity. Since at the moment Darkstone was most interested in news, he pressed the conveniently located button labeled News, and the dial transformed into a matrix of signals which were arranged according to the greatest probability that they might have news of some type or another. Curiously, if not surprisingly, there was only one signal, and it was pulsating very rapidly in bright red, which indicated it originated nearby, within 100 miles to be precise. Having no other choices really, Darkstone pressed the button labeled Listen, and this is what he heard. Blah, 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 blah. Repeated over and over and over. This was the same thing the clown flying the bumper car over the pond had hollered before giving him a thumbs up, honking his horn, and then disappearing into the treetops that surrounded the pond. And this certainly was very strange, because hearing something over the radio tended to give it a special flavor and a sense of being official in one way or another, which made it all the more curious in Darkstone's mind. Yet another of the great aspects of a Universatone radio is its ability to translate alien signals into whatever language most suited the listener, this being, of course, one of the special features that elevated Universatone radios above all others, and one might add, also elevated their prices accordingly. Hence, all Darkstone needed to do was to press the translate button, which was conveniently located just below the listen button, and within a few milliseconds of pressing the translate button, this is what Darkstone heard.
Grab your balls and hit the lanes, cause it's Tiff Tuesday, and every third game is free.
Reflecting for a moment on this newly discovered information, Darkstone decided that the broadcast made just as much sense when it was not translated, so he pressed the untranslate button, which firstly returned the broadcast to its original language, which was, of course, blah blah blah, blah blah blah, and then secondarily caused the label on the button to change back to translate, since after all this was a Universatone radio. As Darkstone was getting ready to disconnect the Universatone, he had the sudden inspiration to see whether there was any activity on some of the other more obscure bands and channels. And since this was a Universatone Galactic radio, all he needed to do was press the button labeled Scan, followed by pressing the Obscure button, which was conveniently located to the right. Just after he pressed the Obscure button, the Universatone Galactic radio began glowing in a soft blue light, and he heard a very official sounding voice broadcasting this message. Melvin Pibble, not his real name, director of the pretend FBI. Calling Ranivir. Come in, over. This broadcast repeated several times, and since it appeared to be directed to him personally, Darkstone moved closer to the Universatone Super Deluxe Broadcaster Master microphone and pressed the conveniently located talk button on the side of the handle, which in turn caused the on-the-air indicator to glow red, and said, Professor Darkstone, to Melvin Pibble, not his real name. Come back, over. After a momentary pause, which was filled with emotionally charged, energetic excitement and growing anticipation, the Universatone Galactic radio began glowing in a soft green light, which indicated that an incoming transmission had begun. And this is what Darkstone heard. Melvin Pibble, not his real name, here. Are you on Ranivir at this time? Over. Without wasting too much time debating whether to reveal his location, since Darkstone had no idea who Melvin Pipple, not his real name, was or what he might be doing, Darkstone quickly decided that he should reply, since it was probably smarter to have a conversation with someone who appeared to be sensible rather than to have a conversation with anyone whose entire train of thought consisted of blah, 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 which is what he did. Affirmative, I'm on Ranivir. Where are you, Pibble? Come back, over. I'm in Chicago, Darkstone, over. Chicago? Come back, over. Yes, you've probably heard of it. The Windy City, over. Well, yes, I know Chicago. It's a wonderful town, right? Come back, over. Absolutely. What time is it on Ranivir, over. It's nearly noon here. What time is it in Chicago? Come back, over. It's 25 or 6 to 4, over. Great, what kind of radio are you using? A Universatone, possibly? Come back, over. I'm not using a radio, actually, over. Curious, then what are you using? Come back, over. I'm using the mind of Bucky, the little mutant raccoon, as a portal right now, over. That's gotta be fascinating. How does it work? Come back, over. It works pretty good, Billy. Over. Well, I suppose the important thing is that it works. Technology is doing what you can with what you have handy. Come back. Darkstone, have you seen any clowns flying around in the sky? In bumper cars. Over. As a matter of fact, I have. Just this morning, actually. Come back. Over. Keep the aluminum foil in place. Do not remove it until the rainbow-colored net in the sky is gone. Repeat, keep the aluminum foil over your head. Over. That's what I thought, too. How'd you know about the aluminum foil? Come back. It's common knowledge in most places. We here at the Pretend FBI have known about aluminum foil for years, and it always works when nothing else does. Over. Well, you certainly can color me convinced. What happens next? Come back. Over. I don't have my Pantone flip book handy, but if I did, I might guess that Pantone 17-0000 Frost Gray should be an excellent color for you now. However, the important thing to do immediately is to get you off Ranivir as soon as possible. Over. What about my family and relatives? Come back. Over. Well, how about Pantone 15-1216 Pale Khaki? Without my flip book, all I can do is guess. The reality is that nothing can be done for them at present, but there is hope eventually. Over. If there's nothing I can do for them here on Ranivir, especially considering that you cannot find your flip book, then I might as well leave. Come back. Over. That's generally the best strategy over the long run. I'll find my flip book sooner or later. Over. So how to get off this planet without going to the city? Come back. Over. Say where you are, and some friends of mine will arrange a pickup. Over. How will I recognize them, Pibble? Come back. Over. As soon as the sun sets, a stagecoach will arrive from the west, and you will hear country western music. Over. I think I follow the logic, although I'm not exactly certain why I did. Then what happens? Come back. Over. The stagecoach will stop at your front door, and the tall cowboy wearing a wide-brimmed hat will lean over the driver's seat and holler, "All on board that's getting on board." And of course, this is your cue to run outside with your stuff and then to jump into the stagecoach. Over. How will I know whether it's the right stagecoach? Come back. Over. The beauty of using a stagecoach is that there is virtually no possibility of it being the wrong stagecoach, especially considering that you have no idea what a stagecoach is, let alone what a cowboy and country western music are. Whatever happens, no matter how strange it might appear, when you hear "all on board that's getting on board," grab your stuff and then jump into the stagecoach, because there's not much time to do everything that needs to be done. Gotta run. I'm just about out of apples, and as soon as Bucky finishes the last apple, I get disconnected. Talk to you soon. Melvin Pipple, not his real name. Over and out. With this last message from Melvin Pipple, not his real name, the Universatone Galactic Radio console stopped glowing softly green and changed to glowing purple to indicate the incoming transmission had ended. and Professor Dave Darkstone looked at the dial for a few more seconds while he thought to himself how truly unusual this day was becoming. Holidays are often a bit strange, but this particular holiday was getting top marks in the truly strange category. Having absolutely no idea what a stagecoach, country western music, and a cowboy might be, but knowing that it was only a few more hours until sunset, Darkstone set himself to the task of packing all his stuff so he would be ready to leave Ranivir as soon as the stagecoach arrived with the sound of country western music, and he heard the tall cowboy wearing the wide-brimmed hat holler, "All on board, let's get on board." Meanwhile, in his suite at the Drake Hotel in Chicago, Melvin Piffle, not his real name, director of the pretend FBI, was sitting in a Victorian claw tub, enjoying a hot bubble bath amidst an armada of floating plastic battleships and a rubber duck, while having an urgent conversation via a flexible showerhead with his saber contacts, who at this very minute were arranging for the tall cowboy with the wide-brimmed hat to pick up Professor Dave Darkstone later that evening just after sunset in his small cabin on Ranivir and to take him off planet to an asteroid located in the middle of an uncharted galaxy somewhere, sometime in the future. Bucky, the little mutant raccoon, having enjoyed about as many apples as a little mutant raccoon might ever desire at one time, was sleeping comfortably in his luxurious, spaceship-approved travel carrier. Occasionally, Bucky heard something in his dreams which sounded a lot like blah, 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 blah. But above all else, Bucky was a raccoon, so what did he care, really? In a different part of the galaxy, on another far distant planet, the Grand Ayatollah grabbed his ball and rolled it down the lane. If he made the split, his score for the tournament would be evenly divisible by 3, which
certainly would be sweet.
And thus ends the 12th chapter of Extreme Gravity, the Slammers Attack Ranivir. Stay tuned for the next chapter, The Happy Valley. This has been brought to you by the fabulously fabulous, marvelously marvelous, wonderfully wonderful science fiction theater of the imagination. I'm Waffle the Potato. Good night.